Today we're going to look at the quadratic formula again to review, and we're going to talk about something called the discriminant. So for the warm-up, use quadratic formula to solve for x, find the zeros of the quadratic. Then use a calculator to graph the function and sketch the graph. So we have x squared minus 4x minus 21. We want to know when that equals 0. In other words, we want the zeros of the quadratic. And we learned before we could factor this, or we could use quadratic formula to solve. So since we just went over quadratic formula, let's review that again. First step is to identify a, b, and c. So a is the number next to the x squared, b is the number next to the x, and c is the number by itself when you have 0 on one side. So I'm going to write that up. A equals 1, b equals negative 4, and c equals negative 21. And remember quadratic formula, x equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And use parentheses around what you plug in. So x equals negative 4, the opposite of negative 4, which is 4, plus or minus the square root of 4 squared, I should say negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. Okay, so there's the first step. Plug in for a, b, and c into your quadratic formula. And then yesterday we talked about solving in 3 chunks, or we call them the 3 musketeers. So here are the 3 chunks that I want to see. We have this chunk, and this chunk. And so we have 4 plus or minus the square root. And if you type this in your calculator with the parentheses, it should give you the answer. So let me clear my scratch pad. All right, so we have negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 21. You should just be able to type that in. So there's the second chunk, and it's 100 all over 2a, or 2 times 1, all over 2. All right, so on your test, I'd want to see these 3 numbers, these 3 chunks, these 3 musketeers. And then we're going to split it up. There's 2 answers here we're going to solve. We have 4 plus the square root of 100, which is 10. So 4 plus 10 divided by 2. And we have 4 minus 10 divided by 2. And so do the top part first. 4 plus 10 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. And we have 4 minus 10, which is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So we have 2 solutions, 2 zeros. X equals 7 and x equals negative 3. When we graph these are the zeros. We should expect to see our graph crossing the x-axis at these 2 points. So let's go ahead and type this in. I'm going to open a graph page and type in our quadratic, which was x squared minus 4x minus 21. Oops, I put negative 21. Minus 21. And again, we can move this around, but we can see our 2 x-intercepts. One's at negative 3, and one is at 7, which we had right here. Negative 3 and 7. If you want to see your whole graph, we've talked about this before, but we can go to Menu, Window Zoom. Zoom Fit usually works, and then you can see everything right here. Okay. So today we're going to look at the discriminant. The discriminant is the number under the square root sign. The discriminant of this quadratic is 100. So again, the discriminant is the number under the radical, and that is b squared minus 4ac. This is what we're going to look at today, the discriminant, and how it relates to our graph, our quadratic. So we'll do an investigation in class. Here it is. For each function, use quadratic formula to practice to find the zero. Split up the work at your table. Record how many zeros the function has. Sketch the function. You can use your graphing calculator. Use Zoom Fit to see the whole graph. Cut out the functions and classify them by the number of zeros the function has. Find the relationship between the discriminant, this part right here, and the number of zeros that your graph has. The ultimate goal, what is the relationship between the discriminant and the number of zeros, which are the roots or the solutions of the function? And then we're going to write it down here when you figure it out. So it's an in-class activity. We'll do a few of them together. So you'll get a sheet of paper, you'll cut it apart and each do a few of these. And So example, here's the first one. Use quadratic formula to find the zeros of this right here. So let's do that real quick. X equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 1 squared. And I should label my a, b, and c. A is 1, b is 1, c is negative 20. So 1 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Oh, and I know what a is. I should write that down. A is 1. Okay, figure out your 3 musketeers, your 3 chunks. We get negative 1 plus or minus the square root. This part you can type in your calculator, but I know 1 squared is 1 plus 80, so this is 81 all over 2. So I want to see that work. Here's the discriminant. It's 81. Let's get our 2 different answers. So here they are, negative 1 plus 9 over 2 and negative 1 minus 9 over 2. So we have 8 over 2, which is 4. We have negative 10 over 2, which is negative 5. So here there's 2 zeros. X equals 4 and x equals negative 5. So there's 2 zeros, and the discriminant is 81. Let's sketch it. So again, you can type this in your calculator. We should expect to see the zeros at 4 and negative 5. So if I hit tab and just go up, oops, I don't want to label that. Okay, so let's type in what we had. So it was, whoops, x squared plus x minus 20. Okay, and we can see our 2 zeros, so we can sketch the graph. One of the zeros is here, one of the zeros is here, so here's the sketch of our graph. Okay, you're going to do this a few more times, and then we're going to look for a pattern. So let's do the next problem together. Let's find the zeros of this function. All right, we could factor something out. Let's just use quadratic formula. A equals B equals C equals. All right, so we have x equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared. I should put that in parentheses. Minus 4ac. Oops. All over 2a. Okay, get our 3 musketeers. We get negative 12 plus or minus. Let's type this in our calculator. Let's use scratch pad. So we have negative 12 squared minus 4 times 9 times 4. Oops. This squared has to be on the outside. Minus 4 times 9 times 4. Okay, so that's 0 all over 18. All right, so this one, the square root of 0 is 0, so we just have negative 12 over 18, and that reduces. I can divide each one by 6, and I'll get negative 2/3. So we only have 1 0 here, and that's at negative 2/3. Our discriminant is 0. And if we sketch the function, what does that look like? So let's go back to our graph. Let's hit tab, and it was 9x squared plus 12x plus 4, and we should have 1 0 at negative 2/3, and there it is, 1 0 at negative 2/3. So let's sketch that. Okay, let's try one more. And I want to pick which one it is. Okay, hold on, let me find which one I want to do. 3x. Okay, this is the one I want to do. All right, so this one right here, again, we're going to identify A is 3, B is 4, C is 2. Let's plug in a quadratic formula. X equals opposite B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Negative 4 plus or minus. Let's type this in our calculator. So we have 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. 4 times 3 times 2. So that's negative 8 over 6. And we have to stop here. We can't take the square root of a negative number. We get an, we get an error if we try to take the square root of a negative number. So there's no real solution here. The discriminant is -8. Let's see what the function looks like. If we were to try to graph this, it shouldn't cross our x-axis. That's what no zeros mean, so let's type it in. 3x squared plus 4x plus 2. And you can see if we zoom in, so I wonder if I can zoom in. We can see that it doesn't really cross right here, so there's no zeros. You're going to try this a few more times. So basically, here's the rule. You look at your discriminant. If your discriminant is negative, you have no real solutions. If your discriminant is 0, you only have one answer, because if you have plus or minus 0, that's just one answer. So again, if your discriminant is 0, you have one root, one real root. And if your discriminant is a positive number, you have 2 answers. So that's our goal for today. Again, let's write it up in that one sheet. The ultimate goal, all right, so I'm going to make this into a table. If we have discriminant, number of solutions. Okay, so let's make this into a table. All right, so if our discriminant is positive, that number on the square root is positive, you have 2 solutions. If it's 0, you have 1 real solution. So we should say number of real solutions. And if it's negative, you have 0 real solutions. Here's what a graph might look like with 2 solutions. Here's what a graph might look like with 1 solution. And here's what a graph might look like with 0 solutions. And again, here would be the solutions.